Well, hey, everybody. This episode is a little bit different from the norm. We're talking to Maria Kuntz, who is the Director of Creative Communications and Services within University Advancement at University of Colorado Boulder. And normally the episodes on this podcast are more tactical and like tips focused. There's more of a focused topic. This one gets a little more personal and a little more vulnerable, and we kind of dig around a little bit more than in most episodes. And so it's really more of a deeper dive into who Maria is as a person, challenges and triumphs she's been through as a student, as an athlete, a researcher, and a mother, and how that has shaped the lens through which she views storytelling and, spotlighting student and alumni stories with sensitivity. And really just the need to dig deeper into what it is that you can know about a student that's beneath the surface of a typical testimonial in order to unearth a story that addresses the true concerns that current or incoming students may be having. So with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast on the EdUp Experience Podcast Network. This is a show dedicated to helping higher ed marketers tell better stories, create better content, and enroll more students. My name's John Azzoni. I'm the founder at Unveiled, and we're a video production company working specifically with college marketing teams to make it easy for them to scale up and even automate their student and alumni success stories through our subscription approach. And you can learn more about that at unveiled.tv, and that's UNVEILD.tv. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, go ahead and subscribe. We'd love to have you. And if you're wanting your college and university's content to resonate on a deeper emotional level with prospective students, with alumni, with parents, whatever, I want you to subscribe to my free newsletter. Every week I send out tips and insights on creating more emotionally resonant content, including examples and best practices from other institutions, articles and blog posts, that week's podcast episode, and much more. So head over to unveiled.tv/newsletter and sign up. All right, let's get on with the show. My guest today is Maria Kuntz. Maria is the Director of Creative Communications and Services for University Advancement at University of Colorado Boulder. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a while since we did like a deep dive episode into one person's story. Usually we stay pretty tactical, but you've got an interesting story. I'm excited for our audience to hear about it and, how that's kind of shaped who you are today as a higher ed Marcom leader, as a storyteller. So yeah, I'm excited to jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
So tell me something that people would be surprised to know about you. Let's start there. That's where we start every episode.
Yeah, I've played club rugby. I played women's club rugby for Loyola Chicago. And it was something I was able to do on study abroad too. So I got to travel parts of southern France with like a D3 regional team in France.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I've watched some of the rugby on the Olympics, and I'm always I'm amazed, where are they playing this at? Because I never see rugby tournaments that you can just go to,
Yeah, their pitches we call them pitches. They're sort of hidden, I would almost say, out of plain sight. Like you might go to a big sports field and not realize there's a rugby pitch. Or I happened to be at an event in Denver yesterday, and we were at the big regional rugby pitch.
Cool.
For Loyola, we played in neighborhood. Some of them were neighborhood parks, some were big complexes. And in the south of France, there were huge stadiums and clubs and some pretty legit spaces.
Is it as violent as people will say it is?
I mean, yeah, people can be vicious. Spiky cleats on hands are a real thing. You got to be careful. And I suffered or experienced a blowout fracture to my orbital bone, put me out a part of a season because I tackled someone who was I successfully tackled someone who was quite a bit bigger than me. And that's what you get.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah.
I would not have pictured that about you. So I'm a little scared of you now.
Yeah, most people don't. The pandemic was great for me because I took my current role during the pandemic. And when I met my team, everyone said, we thought you were so much taller. And I would joke with them beforehand. I said, none of you know how tall I am. And because I said, none of you know how tall I am, I had planted the idea that I was tall.
That they were tall.
Apparently, I learned this is like a language and storytelling sort of tactic, I guess. And I'm in reality 5'2". And so nobody had any idea until they met me in person. It was this really, really interesting experience about language and perception and being a 5'2" rugby player as well.
Interesting. That reminds me of I don't know if it's a video or a show that I saw where they're sort of proving that concept, like the host and had these like social media influencers on, and he kind of like walked them around this set and sort of like planted ideas like
Yeah.
very naturally into conversation. Like I forget how he did it, but like just the power of suggestion. And then they looked at what were all the posts that they made around this set, because they would go
Hmm.
take selfies and do these things and use props and stuff. And like they used that, they created the exact
Suggestion
suggestions
is very
that,
subtle.
yeah, just because
Yeah.
you say something and it sort of plants it, just that idea forms in their mind.
Right, but this is kind of an interesting segue into something I love to nerd out about, and I'm sure we'll continue to circle around, is the power of language and how we frame stories. And I mean, can you remember a time when somebody said, "How short are you?"
Right.
So even to the shortest person you've ever met, Simone Biles, everyone knows now is 4'8". Everyone says, "How tall is she?"
How
She's
tall? Yeah.
4'8". Relatively speaking, I would say she's short, as I would say about myself. But no one's ever said, "How short are you?" Because we have these biases about short and tall and power and impact and presence and what
Yeah.
is preferable.
Yeah, I had a friend growing up that used to say in college, she used to like to ask people, "How young are you?" Because
Yes,
she
that's a
was
great
like,
one.
she's like,
Yeah.
I don't like asking people how old they are. It feels weird.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, interesting. So and then you grew up I recently found out you grew up in Michigan, where I'm based.
Yes, the Mitten State. Yes, I grew up in quite rural Michigan, nestled somewhere between Detroit and Port Huron.
Okay, cool. Well, you told us a little bit about south of France playing rugby, so that's a
Mhm.
good segue into telling us about your educational background. Tell us kind of like
Yeah.
where you been, what you studied, and how you got
Yeah.
how you got here today.
Yeah, it's a circuitous path. I definitely did not ever set out and say, "I will be in marketing." I think I attended undergrad, thinking that, just sort of very, questioning and doubtful of marketing and business and commercialism. And so I studied theater, French, and international studies at Loyola University Chicago. And not knowing it at the time, it was sometime when I was, working in higher ed marketing that I was able to look back and go, "Oh, I spent those years really studying culture, language, storytelling." I was editing last night and sort of circling like, where's the why? What is the point of this story? Like, why do we care about this character? And that is something that's really ingrained in your thinking and training as an actor and a director in the theater realm. You sit there and it's like, why would anyone care about this character? You have to really know them deep down,
Yeah,
to perform it and to build a whole production around it.
yeah.
So that's where I was. Um, I ended up in Denver. I traveled a lot. I studied abroad. I lived abroad. I've done research abroad, and ended up in Denver studying international and intercultural communication, which really delves into issues of identity and politics and how the media shapes narratives, or how entities in media and power kind of play out in shaping narratives and stories about the world in which we live, as well as about people. And I was working at the University of Denver and attending graduate school simultaneously. So I was very much in this, just deep place of studying and putting it in practice, studying, putting it
Mhm.
in practice. And it was felt pretty intense in a really fulfilling way always.
That's awesome. So you have had quite a personal journey here, on top of all that we've talked about. That's kind of impacted, who you are today. I want to talk a little bit about that and like how that's kind of impacted your leadership style.
Mhm.
So can you walk us through the highlights
Yeah.
of,
The
where you
highlights. They're highlights today. Some of them, the lowest lows or the what I would say the low lights. Sometimes later in life you realize they're highlights because
Yeah.
you as a mentor of mine shared with me, and it's a fairly common phrase, right? You learning to make lemonade from lemons
Mhm.
and learning or growing through challenges. One of the things I think so much about is how do we really know the students around us? What do we know about students or alumni? But we'll focus on students to keep it simpler. You know, what do we really know about people and how do we gather information about them so that we can both communicate to them, but also to tell their stories?
Mm.
And so I think I didn't know it at the time. I have sort of two different stories from my one from my undergrad and one from my graduate experience that really impacted sort of how I think day in and day out about higher ed communication and marketing. Um, so as an undergrad, I got there. I was really excited to go to Loyola. It felt like a big dream come true. I was fortunate. I was received a merit scholarship, a full merit scholarship, and I was one of five kids, rural America. My parents did well to support us, but they didn't have college funds for us. So, I remember this sort of, okay, well, we got you here, you're there, you're on your own now. And I remember I got all the student loans they would give me from what do they call them? The subsidized loans or the
Mhm.
federal loans. And then I couldn't finish paying my bill. And
Ah,
so my mom and dad were like, well, we don't know, like, go to financial aid. They didn't know what to tell me either. So I had to do that and just sort of, oh, okay, I guess I'm taking out a private loan. Like I had no idea, but I already moved to Chicago. I was there.
yeah.
So I did that. And then within the first few weeks of school, my parents called me. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a nurse. My dad worked for the big three. And he was laid off. And they said, we just have to let you know your dad's laid off. We're really not going to be able to help you or support you. So kind of whatever happens, you need to figure it out.
Mm.
And that was a big shock. So it's like, oh, okay. I think I had a work study award and I was making 7 or 7.50 an hour working for the Department of Food and Nutrition. And you can only work like 10, 12 hours a week. So, and I didn't talk about that. I didn't reflect on it. And at the time, it's not like I really talked to anybody about it. I just sort of packed it in a backpack and carried it. And it was stress and it was difficult. It wasn't until much later, maybe in the past few years working in higher ed, where I went, oh, I get like I too, I have had that experience of like not really necessarily knowing how I'm going to kind of scrape things together. Or I'm not,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think it's just you make things work, but it wasn't something I spoke about and nobody asked me about it. And I don't, we talk a lot about student success and persistence and connecting students to resources. And I think because there can be shame with that or I don't know, fear, vulnerability. It's not that an 18-year-old is walking around just saying like, "Hey, this thing happened. I don't know what's going on. Where do I turn?" Um,
Right.
so I think that to say that students carry a lot of things and their own kind of personal experience, shame, thoughts about how they need to show up, how they want people to perceive them, what they want people to know about them, impression management might keep them from sharing things that could get them help and resources they need. Um,
Yeah. And I think that's too, like, I have thought about that in terms of storytelling as well in the past, where it's like someone's not going to just raise their hand and tell you like, here's my story, like marketing
yeah,
department, like come on.
yeah,
Come on, let's talk about it. Like you have
right.
to engage in like real conversation with people and really draw that out, to really get at a story that is worth telling. And like you were saying before, like how do you make the student as like a character, like they're just some sort of pawn in your marketing game, but like how do you make this person, you know how do you get the audience to connect with this person so that they can
Mhm.
connect to what they're saying, rather than just, I liked the school and it was great. And
Right. Right. I mean, we walk really, really fine lines, I think, both strategically and then ethically because in storytelling, I have permission and sort of co-collaboration, co-creation to share something that is interesting. I think we have to be careful that we don't then just sort of glamorize, glorify the challenge of life
Right.
for the sake of, oh, and look at the transformation.
Yeah.
It's just a really fine line to walk because we're asking folks to share sometimes things that were challenging, that they weren't willing to just raise their hand and say, oh, hey, by the way, I'm really struggling. Well, rugby kept me at Loyola. So, I mean, I had a full ride. It was the end of my first year. And even that summer, I think I just thought, I don't know. This has been really hard. It was a hard, couldn't even tell you today exactly what was the hard, but I don't think I had a strong sense of connection or direction. And financially, it was really hard. And I had doubts about going back. And then two women who I kind of knew, and they knew each other really well from the track team, invited me to be their roommate because we had sophomore year you had to be on campus. And I was like, okay, well, I'll try that. And then another friend through theater, ironically, was on the rugby team, and she had been a competitive high school athlete. And I said, okay, I'll try that. And I realized later in life, working in higher ed, that was my moment of finding connection and belonging. That
Yeah.
I needed a place to anchor to, that was community, that accepted me, that, you know, just was fun, was something to do and to belong to.
Yeah. So how did you move past, those initial challenges at Loyola, with the, financially and things like that?
I mean, one foot in front of the other. It didn't change much throughout my years there.
But you had a full ride?
Yeah, but you have to pay for room and board,
But yeah, all the
like
living
tuition's
expenses. Yeah.
covered. And we talk about that now at CU, like what's the total cost of attendance? So I was covering room and board and your day in and day out expenses like clothes, I need shoes, something breaks, books. I remember working really hard to find discount books and discount online sellers so that I could get my books cheaper. And I was that student who did not have all the books on the first day of class. Like, especially for theater, we had, a couple dramatic lit classes where we'd have to read 30 some plays in the semester. And so week one of class, you're supposed to have read 3 plays. And I'm like getting them in week 2 or 3
Oh yeah.
because I was ordering them for 50 cents from thriftbooks.com or
Oh
something.
yeah. I used to order all kinds of books from there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think I got a little bit higher paying work study job at one point, and that helped. But, I lived lean. I
Mhm.
was scrappy.
Yeah. Quick break here. I have a question for you. Have you ever had to manage the production of a video before for your school where you were the person that had to coordinate all the scheduling? Like you had like 5 people that needed to be interviewed for this thing and you had to juggle all the schedules and figure out how to line them up for individual slots miraculously on the same day. And on top of that, you had to talk to like your facilities guy and make sure the door to the engineering lab was going to be open at a certain time so the crew could get in there, film some B-roll. You had to coordinate volunteers to be in the footage and blah, 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 and, right? Let me tell you something. Working with an outside video vendor should not look like this. Unfortunately, I've worked with enough video folks to know that the mainstream school of thought is they will coordinate the crew and all the production stuff, the editing, etc., and they will expect you to coordinate all your folks. And I'll be honest, sometimes there's stuff that the video people just can't coordinate for you. Like, I'm probably not going to email your college's president out of the blue to ask them to be in this video and to coordinate their schedule when they've never heard of me or this project. Like, that just makes more sense coming from you, at least to get their initial buy-in. But as much as possible, your job should be to get buy-in from all the right people and then introduce those stakeholders to the video producer to coordinate, which is not you. Unfortunately, we live in a world where it just doesn't work like that most of the time. In fact, I talked to a marketing director at a pretty well-known art school recently who told me he hired this video crew to film a couple program promo videos and they paid a lot of extra money. This was a bit of a splurge, is the impression I got. And they got 2 videos out of the deal. And he said to me, all that money we paid and I still had to coordinate everything. Like, we paid a premium for someone to do these videos and I was doing all the grunt work. So here's the deal. At Unveiled, one of the things we take really seriously is making sure the process is easy on you, especially that pre-production process, which is where a lot of the not fun stuff tends to show up. So whether we're working together through our video storytelling subscriptions, a big commercial, or maybe a smaller one-off video project, know that in addition to delivering a great end product, we also have our eyes on making that a smooth and oftentimes fun journey along the way. And even after it's done, we want to make sure you're set up for success, which is why we give you all the raw footage, all that B-roll and interview footage to repurpose however you want at no extra charge. So if you have video needs right now, don't let the management of those projects stress you out. We are your partners in taking as much work off your plate as possible. So if that's you, I want you to head over to unveiled.tv. That's unveiled.tv and book a call with me. And let's talk about how we can best support you. All right, back to the show. So where'd you go from there when you left Loyola? How did your personal and professional life progress? What challenges did you run into? That kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, Loyola was phenomenal for me and I had great mentors. So I really fortunately landed a Fulbright research fellowship, a graduate research fellowship in Greece. So I had a few months between graduation and departure, but I spent a year there doing really incredible work. And then I moved to Denver because I have 4 brothers, and my oldest brother had this rock climbing accident, and he was based in the Denver area. I moved out here to be with him, and sort of, that was 17 years ago. I stayed. I didn't know it would be so great. He's 100% healed and good and fine. I always have to include that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a special moment. So I got to working and did a couple of years worked in the nonprofit sector out here doing fundraising, and really knew deep down that I wanted to go back to school. I wanted a graduate degree. And so I ended up working at University of Denver, and about a year into working there, started my graduate program in international and intercultural communications. So at that point, I was in my probably late 20s, and my son, I was married, I'd started my family. So I had a son who was about to turn 3 when I started graduate school. I was working full time, living the dream as best you can, like
Yeah.
it's not easy, but
3 is a
it
tough
was what I
age.
wanted. Say it again.
3 is like the best age and
Yeah.
also the toughest. I feel like 3 and 4 area, it's like the most precious, but
Yeah.
also the most like, they're the most neat. They're like very needy. Like they can talk, they can say things, they want to talk to you, they want to play with you, but also they can't
Yes.
do things themselves. And so
And
it's
you
like,
want them to do certain things themselves and they're not there yet. Yes.
yeah.
Um, so I think that was that was an interesting point in life of really starting to work on what I now call life work integration. It's not just balance, it's integration. There was
Hmm.
this sort of every day kind of charting the path every week of, how am I going to get to class and get to work and get my son to childcare. And I was married at the time and went through a divorce during graduate school and during that period of life. So, it started one way. It started with a 2-parent system. And by the time I graduated from grad school, it was mainly a 1-parent system. My son was with me most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that, there were those are the kind of the other challenges. I think when I mentioned I had 2 sets of challenges, one in undergrad and one in graduate school, was getting to this point where, okay, I did all of my coursework and I took some time off and needed time to process and go through a divorce. And I knew I had to come back and do my thesis, which was
Mm-hmm.
big. It was a research project. I read 200 to 300 newspaper articles in Greece and looked at how newspapers were framing the Greek economic crisis, and then doing this comparative study of how it was done in Greece versus how it was done in all of these other countries.
Mm.
And that's intensive. Qualitative AI research tools were brand new, and everyone was very skeptical of them. It was like major shade if somebody said they were using qualitative content analysis tools in their work. So they existed, but it's not, if I was doing the same thing today, I would approach it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And my challenge was time. I said, I just need time. I'm
Yeah.
working all day. I'm taking care of my son. I need time to do my research. And I read an article recently, and I think it was maybe it was Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle. And, the article is about why the caregiving crisis is driving scholars out of higher ed. And I was like, oh, I got to read this. And I read it and I was like, yes, bingo. Because it's not just scholars. Caregiving is sort of this new need that I think it's estimated that 20% of students who are in higher ed in some fashion have caregiving duties.
Mm-hmm.
And that extends to staff and faculty. And while the article focused on faculty, one of the people profiled was sharing how what they needed was time, that you can get grants for microscopes and
Yeah.
tools and books, but your time is sometimes what you need. And there was a graduate research fellowship at where I attended, and I'd spoken to my advisor and I said, the biggest hurdle I have right now is just the time to do it. And I don't have childcare and I can't really afford to pay someone regularly to watch my son so I can focus on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the application and she said, well, just go for it and see what happens. And I did not, I did not get funding for that. And what I heard through unofficial channels was we just never received a request like this and we didn't want to open up the can of worms.
Yeah.
And so when I read this article, I thought, this is really something. It's not just me that experienced it. There are faculty, there are staff members experience it. And I think, 20% of students have caregiving duties. Time is sometimes what you need, and that's where you need support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a, my wife and I always talk about how do single parents do it at all? Like, I mean, with all kinds of situations,
With a
like,
lot of gray hair.
I mean, I've just like, I mean, even just like weird fringe situations. Like my dog at one
Yeah.
point was like, I took my kids to the park when they were really little. Like, my youngest, I think was maybe 1 or 2. And then my oldest was maybe 4 or something, that I don't know. And my dog, collar broke and she got off the leash and
Oh,
ran and was running after this other guy and his dog. And I'm
no.
like, I can't leave my kids here and I have to go get this dog. And I'm like, I like asked this mom to like watch the
Yeah.
kids and I ran and got the dog. And I came back and I remember just telling the mom, like, how do single parents do this? There's so many other situations where it's like, I can't be in
Yeah.
two places at once. Or like one person, if like, my wife gets like really sick or something, she's like, I don't know how, like, what do single parents do if they're sick and don't have anyone
Yeah.
to like give the
Yeah.
kids off to so that they can just focus on healing. And then obviously with, there's this idea of like working on future growth as a parent in the fringe hours. I think there's like a whole book about like the
Mm-hmm.
fringe hours or
Mm.
something like that. Um,
Yeah.
but even that is tough. I mean, especially with kids that young, 2, 3, 4, bedtime isn't
Yeah.
always like, they don't necessarily stay in bed after, 8 or 9 o'clock.
Right. And you're tired. You're
Yeah.
tired. Maybe like, I guess I used my fringe hours to do my graduate research. That's what I did. It was like 9 to 11 every night, bedtime. I fell asleep in bed frequently, getting my son to just get down to bed. And then I'd wake up and go write. I carried him. He came to class with me. We joked he was the youngest student in the international IIC program, International and Intercultural Communication. He was at potlucks. There was one required class that just was always going to be at night, and I had to be there. And we tried, Zoom wasn't a thing yet. We tried all these ways to record it and have me phone in. And in the end, I said, it's not going to work. I'm going to miss so much content. And it takes a supportive community. If and I say that that is not something everybody has.
Hmm.
And I think if we think about caregivers, even students who might be caring for a parent in higher ed, they need a supportive community.
Yeah.
They need to be seen, they need to be heard. They may not raise their hand and say, I'm struggling with this. So it kind of goes back to that earlier question of how do we learn what our students actually need and what they're struggling with beyond the things that we sort of have data on already.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's an interesting, case study about, childcare. And gosh, daycare is like so incredibly expensive. And I can't imagine like trying to really get a lot done with kids. What do you feel like how do you feel like that experience shaped, how the lens which you
Yeah.
view your role today at University of Colorado?
Yeah. I mean, my roles are I've wear a number of hats, right? So as a storyteller, I really think a lot about what do I know about a person, what sort of public information, what has been shared versus what don't I know? And how can I respectfully ask and be curious and find out more and meet somebody where they're at with what they're willing to share?
Yeah.
Um, I've also had the experience of, for example, we talked about glorifying certain identifiers, right? So that could be somebody's race, ethnicity. It could be their first gen status. It could be in engineering. It could be that they're a woman, because statistically speaking, there are more people who identify as male studying engineering. So when I think about how I'm going to tell a story, I have to be careful that I'm not layering my biases and assumptions on somebody that that's what they want to talk about.
Yeah.
So if I frame all the questions and prepare everything in from this place of like, well, I think that's intriguing, or oh, you're a woman, so this must be extra special for you. But that's actually coming from a place of what my belief system is.
Hmm.
So I like to ask folks, what is important to you in telling this story? What are the things that matter to you? And in one case, I asked somebody and I said, well, um, I know you're a first gen student. Is that important to you in the telling of your story? Is that something you want to talk about? Is that something you want to emphasize?
Hmm.
It gives choice. I think, it's a choice and it's a conversation starter, and they might say yes. And I think the time I asked that person, I think they were sort of like, oh, that is interesting. And it wasn't what we focused on. I mean, it was true, but it wasn't the main point.
Yeah. College marketers, we have these like key identifiers like first gen student. Oh, perfect. That's a whole segment of our
Right.
population we can market to with that.
Yeah.
Or, an adult student. You're an adult student. You must have this, and this, barrier or whatever. But yeah, I love that. I really do think it is important to ask what's important to the student and not inject our own like marketing biases. And for me, I'm always after what's interesting.
Right.
When I'm interviewing somebody, there's always, the part of me that's looking at their story through the lens of like, what else is this about?
Hmm.
Other than you liked the school and you had a good
Yeah.
experience, like what else can this be about? And sometimes there is something there and sometimes there's not. And that's okay. Like I always say, like, there's nothing wrong with the video with just a standard testimonial where someone's like, this program
Yeah.
was great and here's why it was great. And I recommend it. Like that's a great piece of social proof right there. That's like a Google
Yeah.
review, you know?
Yeah.
But like the times when you can make it about something else, like if you can get the person to be a little bit vulnerable and talk about like struggles and things like that, or just some other path to how they
Yeah.
took to the program, it's so much more interesting. And as a storyteller, like that's like where my brain goes. But I also have to like check myself and be like, that might not be what they thought they were going to talk about here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Eh,
It took me a while to be willing to start talking about different parts of my story that are really personal, because I didn't know how other people, I had a fear and vulnerability around how that would be received. So even as a student, I was also a working professional. And I really thought, well, how much do I want people to know what's really going on? Because they might make assumptions about me
yeah.
that could inhibit my goals and aspirations. So, I don't think, candidly speaking, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I thought, well, who's going to say, oh yeah, the woman who just went through a divorce and is a single parent, she's our top choice for this next job.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I want to believe that people really look at skills and track record, and I think people do, but I think the human side is, you want to protect and create your own persona and present what you want people to present.
Mhm.
It's why what we put on social media is really important.
Yeah.
If it's been up there for a nanosecond, it's permanently up there.
Mhm.
I tell my teenagers, you don't know who screenshot it.
Yeah.
Even if you deleted it, it was up there. There's a record. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think as I've come into my own and I just, you know, sometimes when you're not in the thick of something, it's easier to talk about it, or it's easier to see it because you've kind of experienced and made it through and you can reflect on it from a distance.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think, like, in just considering the whole person, I remember I went through a time of just, like, really intense mental health struggle and,
Yeah.
was, like, thinking about a career shift because I was just like, I might just need something different here,
Mhm.
to, like, get out from under this pressure that was kind of on me as a creative director at the time. And then it was the first time in so long I was applying to jobs, and, like, these applications were like, "Do you have a disability?" And my wife and I are talking. I'm like, I mean, I like, it feels like a disability right now, but I don't want to say
Yeah.
that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, who wants to disclose that? I mean, it's really tricky. Yeah.
yeah. So tell me about, because there was some really interesting things in that article, that you shared, with from the Chronicle, about just, like, especially, like, moms not wanting to, like, identify those struggles and appear too
Yeah.
momish or something.
Mommy.
Mo-
Yeah, it was great line, like, I didn't want to appear too mommy.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's probably other things, like, there was another article that you shared with me about the college safety net, and, what do you feel like colleges and universities need to be more aware of when it comes to, individual needs of students? We talked a little bit about that, but, what are some of your
Yeah.
thoughts on some of those other needs outside of, parenting, that our students might be facing, and that play into
Yeah.
the story that they have to tell?
Yeah, there's a great article the other day about the college safety net, or I think it's a report, so I wasn't able to read it, but I read sort of the high level, and it was saying that, you know, as the student populations are changing, low income and first generation students are pushing the need for wraparound services and the growth of wraparound services. So, going back to sort of the way, how was that story framed? The story was framed that first gen and low income students need wraparound services. And I would say yes. And how do we know who all needs wraparound services? Because students are experiencing things that they're not willing to share. Or because they just don't know what they don't know. They don't know their resources. Um, so it got me really thinking about this concept of universal design. And I mean, I think the wraparound services are absolutely fantastic and they're needed and they're helping a lot of students. And I'm thinking out like, okay, how do we go the next step? How do we make it so that we meet students wherever they're at and we are curious? What are the mechanisms to be curious about all of our students and help them navigate what it is they specifically need? So that could be mental health resources, that could be access to a food pantry, it might be academic resources, it might be study skills, which students come into college with really varying levels of how to study and succeed in a college level course, which is generally really different than high school.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, my thinking is okay, how do we go to that next level? And I was having this, I've been mulling it over the past few days. What is there a way, even in the future, that we use AI to give students a way in which they can disclose? And, we had a questionnaire that's not like, do you need mental health services, but have you felt this way? Or do you, struggle with this? Or how confident are you in your study skills?
Mhm.
Well, in the student who says, I'm not so confident, that the program can produce sort of a suite of personalized resources. Like all of these resources are here. Here's their office hours. I mean, in the really perfect world, would be saying, take all of that, match it up with their class schedule, and say, in the next month, you should go on Monday, the 27th, to academic resources. And here's how you get an intake to assess wellness resources for whatever your concerns are. But I think what that takes is building institutions that are curious, that have ways of connecting with students, every student, to find out what it is they are identifying they need help with. And then, I go back to the concept of universal design, that if we design a system well, it will serve. A universal design would say all or most people. So if you think about a PowerPoint presentation, um, if the font size is too small, certain people can't read it. But if you bump up the font size, everyone can read it. Nobody loses.
Yeah.
So how do we get to systems that are really thoughtfully designed with that in mind?
Yeah.
So that nobody is excluded and everyone can access and navigate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So sum this all up for me. I mean, you've had really interesting, international experience, educational experience, personal highs and lows, and you do a lot of storytelling at University of Colorado. Like, how does it all tie together for you? Like, what would you want to leave our audience with?
Be thoughtful, be curious, be mindful in your storytelling, in your content, in your strategy. We, as storytellers and marketers, we wield a lot of power, both in the individual interaction and the institutional realm. Like, we're institutions telling individual stories. So we are outsized in terms of our power. And take the stories that are given to you, that are shared with you, and take that with so much care, because we have the power to amplify and leave a lasting impact. And it's a big responsibility. So, go forth, tell wonderful stories, do great work, and connect with people.
Love it. Where can people connect with you at?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's the best place. And, reach out for a connection, chat, Zoom, talk online. I'm open to all of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for, sharing your story with us today, being a little bit vulnerable. I think it'll be interesting for our listeners just to see kind of someone at your level of their career, just kind of like behind the curtain of, what it took to get there and how that shaped who we are today. So thanks for being here.
John, thank you so much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening. 3 things I want to give you before you go. Number 1, reminder to sign up for my free weekly newsletter, all about creating content that resonates emotionally with your audience. And you can do that at unveiled.tv/newsletter. Unveiled is spelled UNVEILD. Number 2, if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Share it with your team, your boss, your dog, whatever. And if you're not already subscribed, I'd love for you to do that. Number 3, reach out to me. If you have comments, questions, you want to talk about a video project, whatever, my email is john@unveiled.tv. John is spelled JOHN. Or follow me on LinkedIn. If you're searching for me, my last name is spelled AZONI. That's all for today, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode of the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast. Thanks.